welcome to Preemie Chats. Thank you for joining us. Preemie Chats is a place for parents and healthcare professionals to gather, share stories, and learn from each other. I'm your host for today's session, Jenna Morton. I'm the preemie mom of 32-week twins who are now about to be 11 years old. Preemie Chats is the creation of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation, also known as CPBF. You can find us online at canadianpreemies.org. The foundation is a parent-led charity that helps families during and after their NICU time through education, support, and advocacy. You can visit the website there, canadianpreemies.org. You'll find links to our previous Preemie Chats, our podcast, all kinds of fantastic resources. After today's session, this discussion will be available online there as well. Most importantly, on the website, you're going to find a community of parents and professionals who are working together to help our children thrive. Our discussions are always open for your participation, so please, I'd love to hear in the comments where you're joining us from today, and please feel free to share your stories and thoughts as we go through today's discussion. We will have an opportunity at the end today for some questions and answers, so please drop those in the comments as we go or hold them to the end. Well, today's guest is someone who needs no introduction to some of you in the healthcare world, and some of you watching will have benefited from his work without having known it, but you'll learn about it today. Today's guest is Dr. Niels Bergman. He's known throughout the global medical community for his work championing kangaroo mother care. He's part of the team that developed and implemented the concept, and he's given keynote presentations on this topic in 6 continents. We're very happy to have him joining us today. Dr. Bergman holds a diploma in child health, a master's in public health, and a doctorate in clinical pharmacology. He's worked extensively through South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Sweden. Welcome to Preemie Chats, Dr. Bergman.
Thank you very much, Jenna.
I'm so looking forward to this discussion today, to this presentation, and I know everyone else is as well, so we're just going to kind of jump right in and let you take control of today's discussion.
Thank you very much. And all of you who are listening, welcome. I'm in Sweden right here. It's dark outside, but I have just moved into an office and I have bright lights that I've installed. You're the first to see the pretty pictures. But this is not the first. Here, it's also World Prematurity Day coming up. And the theme is small actions, big impact, immediate skin-to-skin care for every baby, everywhere. I must get this to work. I can. And so there you have the logo. And thank you, Jenna, for the introduction. I'm also now working in Sweden. I live in Stockholm, and I work with colleagues from the Karolinska Institute that you'll also see some photos of later on. You heard Jenna mentioning also that this is about prematurity. And the message I want to bring is zero separation and nurture science for preterm births. And I can break this up into these 3 pieces. So zero separation is catchy, I hope. I've coined the phrase. But why? Separation, what's with the separation? And so I need to tell a little bit of a story starting further back. This is Ignaz Semmelweis. He was professor of obstetrics in Vienna. And he made a discovery there that you could wash your hands and mothers wouldn't die of puerperal sepsis. But he was a cantankerous individual, and his friends, he didn't have any friends. In fact, they got ousted in him. He had to live in Budapest. This is his office in Budapest. And these are the current professor of obstetrics and professor of neonatology in Budapest, in his very office. It was a wonderful thing for me to be in his office, and you'll hear why. Because he and I share something greatly in common. So here he made this amazing discovery, and his colleagues refused to accept it. How could washing your hands possibly prevent mothers from dying? Now, you and I think we know, because there's something called the germ theory. It didn't exist when Semmelweis was working. There was miasma, and there was contagion and epidemics. And actually, the will of God would determine everything. And then there was the microzyme. All of these reasons for, we don't believe in these anymore. As Semmelweis died insane in a lunatic asylum, the germ was being discovered. Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch put forward principles that we now understand as germ theory. But this is the foundation that we understand the reason that when you wash your hands, you prevent spread of bacteria that are deadly. The spread of bacteria deadly was a fact. And Semmelweis observed correctly, but his observation conflicted with what people believed, and he couldn't explain it. So this confliction, rejection, is called the Semmelweis reflex. The Semmelweis effect, a tendency to reject new evidence or new knowledge because it contradicts established norms, beliefs, or paradigms. And here's the word paradigm. This is book code structure of scientific revolutions. It's a constellation of beliefs, values, and techniques shared by the members of a given community. Another definition, assumptions, practices that constitutes a way of viewing reality for the community that shares them, especially in an intellectual discipline, like obstetrics is what Semmelweis was in. Now, I share something with Semmelweis, obstetrics and neonatology. We have assumptions. We're very proud of our evidence-based medicine, and we don't imagine that we have assumptions, values, but that's what a paradigm actually means, assumptions. So here is a way of viewing reality. This way of viewing reality, this is Bacchus, the wine god of ancient Rome. You can see the wine leaves in his hair, and you can see his beard. But if you look more carefully, and I take away his beard, there in the middle, you can see the black hair of a young man and the black hair of a beautiful girl passionately kissing each other. Can you half close your eyes? Jenna, anybody, can we see that this is actually a picture of a young couple under a bower of leaves at the end of the garden? Just two ways of viewing reality. It's the same reality, just different ways of interpreting it. And I've called this paradigm shift. And the question is, no, this is not a paradigm shift. This is an optical illusion. But it illustrates you can look at it and you can look at it in a different way. And therefore, I want to look in a different way at mother and newborn and introduce zero separation. So where did the separation come from? Not from Stefan Taranier, but he was important because his neighbor had eggs that he hatched in a machine, hatchery. And so Stefan thought, you know what, I could put my weaklings into this and they could survive. And he had a good friend called Pierre Boudin, and Pierre said, no, yes, maybe. Let's put windows on it because, you see, human babies have mothers. Inside will be warmth and humidity that the eggs needed and the protection from germs that we learned from Semmelweis. Outside was mothers providing care and milk. This worked beautifully. This worked excellently. And so it was taken to the commercial arena by Martin Cooney. And he made a lot of money in this way. And he went on tours in the United States for 4 years and earned so much money that he could build a permanent pavilion where you could come and see this. And you could show off the babies lying here. Now, everything didn't go so well in the beginning. In 1898, all the babies died, and he made a big financial loss. So what did they die of? They got infections. They got diarrhea. So where did diarrhea come from? Germs and mothers had germs, because remember, puerperal sepsis was mother's germs. And so Cooney blamed the mothers. He enrolled wet nurses and prettier nurses to show the babies off. It was good for revenue, you see. Mothers got free passes to the shows only. And for 20 years, Cooney also experienced Semmelweis syndrome. In his case, the will of providence was the reason, because people said these babies were too small. They were not meant to survive. And Semmelweis fought for these babies, and he really worked very, very well. Yes, he excluded the mothers. But after a while, the first hospital, look, 1923, follows suit. And now they accept Semmelweis's policy of strict separation. Mothers have germs, and they're deadly for their babies because their babies are too small. So I want to say here that this idea that we separate mothers from babies is not evidence-based. It is a paradigm. It's an assumption. It's a belief system, a practice that is the way we view reality without further questions. So where did separation come from? I want to suggest that it's an accident of history. 100-year-old accident of history, and we're still there. We still have mothers and babies that are separated. So, separation. Now, what about nurture science? Semmelweis could offer no acceptable scientific explanation. Now, I introduced the concept of the paradigm and the paradigm shift because I want to shift the assumption and the practice of viewing reality. So when I view reality in terms of a scientific revolution, I want to replace a constellation of beliefs with some science. Are we okay so far? Science. So the science here, I'm going to take from Panksepp. He's one of my heroes, and he refers to a central dogma about any life science. DNA makes the gene, makes RNA, makes proteins. And in particular, proteins build up a brain with sensory receptors. More DNA and more brain makes everything else, makes an organism that behaves in the environment, behavior. And therefore, this is the central dogma. And then he says, we're missing the environment. So when I unpack this science to you and to my neonatal and obstetric colleagues and the world, there's Panksepp, DNA, brain, behavior. The environment is the major determinant. And therefore, nowadays, we know a lot about the DNA, and I'm calling it the genome in its broadest sense. And the genome has epigenes, epigenetic switches that read the environment and tell the gene to make a protein that's good for that environment. That protein in the brain reads the environment through sensory experience. That experience fires and wires circuits in the brain. Those circuits fire and wire a behavior of the organism in the environment. Notice the environment is the common thread. And the objective is not to survive. The objective is to thrive. And you heard this even in Jenna's introduction. How will we thrive? Reproductive fitness is another term for that. So, when Semmelweis could offer no scientific explanation, I'm packaging this nurture science explanation of what's going to come. Semmelweis was ridiculed. So was Cooney, so was Panksepp. Panksepp said animals have emotions. Now, I was taught at medical school, no, emotions is a uniquely human something. Animals don't have emotions. And so Panksepp shows that they are. And his book is called Affective Neuroscience, Emotional Science. So this is an oxymoron, a contradiction in terms or incongruous words. And I've heard this directly. I'm told the intensive care unit is not a place or time for nurture and nice things and emotions. You see, babies need this technology to survive. Separation is absolutely necessary. Technology saves lives. And we've always been separating babies, and our outcomes are improving all the time. And so, yes, nurture will do soon. But first, I must get this baby to survive, and the parent is not allowed to come near. So let's look more closely. Nurture science. Nurture is a difficult word, actually, to translate into languages and even to understand. But from the dictionary here, I've got 3 definitions. The first is nurture, to grow something up into a secure being. The root word is actually linked to feeding. Fed him, nourished himself. Nurture is food. Breastfeeding, nurturing. And then there is this nature versus nurture. Is it the gene or the early environment? So here are 3 definitions. And I want to show you that they match perfectly, you see. The nature or nurture is the epigene that is reading the environment to tell the gene, therefore, it's nature and nurture, not nature or nurture. And that behavior in the brain is about suckling and breastfeeding and food in the first instance, and the connections it makes in the brain, the development. And that leads to a secure being who's thriving, who's got reproductive fitness. So you see, I've got a very scientific definition, and nurture is the right word to capture all of this. This nurture is based on our science. And when I say the intensive care unit is not a time or place for nurture, for species such as primates, the mother is the environment, says Sarah Blaffer Hardy. James McKenna, nothing an infant can or cannot do makes sense except in the light of mother's body. You see, the green environment, the gene and the epigene, and its circuits, its behavior and its well-being, nothing an infant can or cannot do makes sense except in the light of mother's body. And it doesn't matter if mother's body is in the jungle of Papua New Guinea or the concrete jungle in a hospital in Sweden. Nothing an infant can or cannot do makes sense except in the light of mother's body. It's mother's body that the baby needs for its environment. This provides an ecology. Ecology is a complicated thing, so we don't really like to study it. We like to break things down in reductionism. But skin to skin is bringing mothers and babies together in the right place. And here we see immediate skin to skin. This is the theme of World Prematurity Day that we're coming up to next week. And so mother is the environment for her baby. She's also the organism that her baby interacts with. And so the organisms, the 2 organisms and their physical surroundings is a single whole. This is essence of ecology. And here I've written the first 1,000 days begins with the first 1,000 minutes. Everybody's good on the 1,000 days, you see, the early childhood development. But the research in the beginning kind of looked in the first weeks maybe, but then months and this first year. Actually, it's at birth that the critical things are taking place. First 1,000 minutes is a day, 16 hours. The first 1,000 seconds is the first hour. The critical period at birth and going forward that require immediate skin to skin. Microbiota colonization, signaling hormones, clocks, early colostrum. I don't have time in this presentation to go into details, But here are some 6 bullets that says, I must start immediately. And when you do, what you will observe in the baby is a behavior. And we might call this instinctive. Now, when I was in medical school, remember, animals had emotions and no emotions, but instincts. Humans have intelligence, not instincts. So let's not call them instincts. Let's call them highly conserved neuroendocrine behavior. You see? So that highly conserved is 40 million years in the code of the DNA that makes this behavior wired in the brain. The neuroendocrine is neurotransmitters, but also hormones in the body that makes a behavior. And what you saw was the suckling. When you only saw the suckling and you didn't realize what I've explained, its origins, you might have said this wasn't important. But this is hardwired, meant to be in this way. You're familiar with the 9 steps, and we're not going to go into those here. But let me show you how hardwired it is. This baby is 29 weeks gestation. Born in Vietnam with my research partner, colleague there, and her colleague has this baby at 29 weeks, and it's been 0 separation. And here you see the baby doing a strong suckling motion. It is able to extract and swallow the colostrum. You didn't even know there was colostrum there. Why didn't you know? Because you never imagined that a 29-week baby would be able to suckle. You thought it would choke if it got anything in its mouth. But no, it suckles and swallows very, very competently. And it's pink. And that's because it's regulating at 29 weeks. Skin to skin contact started immediately, 0 separation. So this is the nurture that we're looking for. And what I now need to point out is that the baby is regulated by suckling. That's its behavior, which is up here in the neurodevelopment, you see. That's breastfeeding. Suckling, I called it. It becomes breastfeeding soon, but in the beginning, it's suckling. And then the baby sleeps. And then it wakes up and it connects to its mother. And its mother is attuned to its connecting. Because, go back to in the very, very beginning, when the baby was suckling on the mother's breasts, the baby was wiring the mother's brain to become sensitized to it. So let's look at a bit of this neuroscience. Here you see what's called the mirror neurons. This 12-hour-old baby is looking at his mother's face, and when she is sad, the baby feels sad because its face is sad, and it's learning empathy starting in the first hour of life. Happy mirror neurons. And these are oxytocin-driven circuits in the brain. And oxytocin enhances interpersonal trust and the ability to read the emotions of others. These are things I was taught at medical school. Only children master much later in development, you see, because this is highly advanced. This is highly fundamental. And so I described how the baby would suckle and sleep and then wake up and connect to its mother and repeat this. These are called the primary occupations. Albert's called them habitat niche, different terminologies that are used. But these 3 things a neonate does and must be allowed to do. It must suckle and feed, go to sleep, and then wake up, connect with mother, feed, and repeat this cycle. So now I'm going to go into a little practicality here, unpacking it away from reference published articles that can be difficult to understand. And here I've added two brains of a baby and a mother, baby's stomach, mother's breast, and two people sleeping, a baby and a mother. The baby and the mother do not sleep the same way. Did that need telling? No. But now there is something common about their sleep. A baby has a 1 hour sleep cycle, and it's intended only to be a 1 hour sleep cycle. Then it should wake up, and then it should say hello to mother, eye contact, and then it should suckle, and then it should go to sleep again. 1 hour sleep cycle. Now, the mother also has a 1 hour sleep cycle, except she has blocked together 5 or 6 of those sleep cycles at night. This is an adult way of sleeping. The sleep cycles are exactly the same, only the baby has 1 at a time and the mother wants 6 at a time. But if we understand now the mother needs support to be able to support the baby's 1 hour sleep cycle, because the baby also needs to feed 1 hourly. What's with the 1 hourly feed? Well, if you look at the stomach size of the baby, it's 20 milliliters. If you look at the milk ejection reflex, a 1 milk ejection reflex, it's 20 milliliters. This is efficient and quick and relaxing. The baby suckles a milk ejection reflex and it fits into the stomach. You can force the baby to have 3 milk ejection reflexes and it's going to feel sick. It's going to reflux. It's going to have pain and colic. And therefore, that's not physiological. So what do we have? We have a simpler mechanism where the baby and the mother's brain connect, and in a joyful way. And I use the word joyful scientifically. It's a dopamine level function of play and interaction, where the sociality, affiliation of oxytocin becomes rewarding and joyful of dopamine. So this is the 3 occupations, but single cyclical rhythm of the baby's behavior. If one of these doesn't work, none of them work. So we want to smooth the baby's ride into this with family, friends, not by controlling it in all sorts of different ways. Connection, feeding, sleeping. These MRI pictures are taken of mothers who are listening to their own baby crying. Or, you can see in B, they're shown a photograph of their own baby crying or laughing. And then we can see in the MRI where the parts of the brain are activated. And the oxytocin part of the brain and the dopamine part of the brain, I've put arrows there, are parenting parts of the brain. Those are fundamental for parenting. The whole dopamine system, there's a number of dopamine receptors, but one part that we're referring to here is specific for parenting. And it's the baby, when it suckled, and when it made little grunts, and when it made little scratches on the mother's nipple, the baby connects maternal oxytocin and dopamine. When they do not connect, you can see the failure of connection on an MRI machine, and that displays as maternal neglect. So, dopamine and oxytocin connection is what's happening in the first 1,000 seconds of zero separation. Starting in the baby. It takes 20 hours of zero separation to consolidate the circuit in the mother, because she has this circuit and a lot of other circuits. The father has only this circuit, and he needs just half an hour or 1 hour of skin to skin sometime also. So now, here is the third hormone, cortisol. So oxytocin and dopamine and cortisol are actually part of a single system. This single system shares stations on the network of a city, if you like. and they do different things, but they have a single process. And that single overriding objective of this circuit is to determine, am I safe? So let's start still. This baby is 6 hours old. It's going to be put into an MRI machine. 0 separation. It suckled, it slept, it suckled again. And now sometime in the evening, around 6 hours, we can put this baby into a vacant MRI machine. And the baby has 5 resting state networks. There are their names. Let me just put them on the map. These 5 resting state networks are waiting to be born. The stress of being born wakes them all up. And when the baby is in the safe place that it recognizes from smell and sound and temperature, it opens its eyes. That's why you had to have a primary visual area, because only when you get that primary visual area to the face can you read the emotion, can you make the emotional connection. So this circuitry is being wired in the first hour of life, oxytocin and dopamine with cortisol. Cortisol is very high in the birth arena. Cortisol, am I safe? No, fear. Exactly the same cortisol rises in the response to pain. So pain and fear make cortisol rise. So here we see a set of single circuitries, and this is the scientific article, if you like, biological mechanisms of resilience. I'm talking very slowly here. I'm going to have to speed up just now. Implications, resilience, and vulnerability. So what happens here is that this is considerable overlap with these neural mechanisms. And when the oxytocin and dopamine are higher, they can bring back calmness and emotional connection. When fear circuits are stronger for all sorts of reasons, then the cortisol stays higher in the system. This is how resilience works. Resilience is the capacity to maintain healthy emotional functioning in the aftermath of a stressful experience. The more dopamine and oxytocin connection I got in the first 1,000 seconds and in the first 1,000 minutes, the more quickly I can bring the necessary high cortisol back to normal. The less I get that early connection, and the more cortisol gets to do its thing in the first hour, the more permanently cortisol will be staying higher, and I have less capacity to maintain healthy emotional functioning in the aftermath of a stressful experience. And so the Canadian Breastfeeding Premature Association, you're looking to ensure thrive. To do that, you must ensure resilience, capacity to maintain emotional functioning in the aftermath of a stressful experience. And so there is the emotional connection is not a nice luxury. It's not something that nurture, we don't really need it because we're dealing with survival. If we want survival, we do need nurture. We do need the resilience that is going to lead to lifelong health, in contrast to the vulnerability. And when dopamine reward is linked to oxytocin connection affiliation, this is a very, very strong unit. And it can overcome fear and pain. And so toxic stress is when this oxytocin circuitry never gets a chance to really establish itself, and cortisol does. And therefore, cortisol receptors increase, and the cortisol receptors make for toxic stress and vulnerability. And so everything depends on answer to the one question: am I safe? If I'm safe, I can work on growing, nutrition, and reproduction, thrive. If I'm not safe, my brain focuses on survive. So yes, we think survive is good, but that's not thriving. That's not reproductive fitness. That's a trade-off that we've made, where for survival, we're paying with depression. Is Panksepp summary. We're paying with changes, trade-offs that give us vulnerability across the lifespan. And this is still Panksepp. Integration of emotional systems. That was the amygdala. With social systems, that was the frontal lobe. That had to do with the broad coordination of hormones, with the oxytocin, with the dopamine centers that I show pictures of. And here you will see that it's smell and warmth and contact and sounds that drive, that tell me that I am safe and I will approach and I have competent fitness. And so it's not the baby and the mother in isolation. It's the interaction between the mother and the baby, and even the parent, not just the mother. And these interactions are what makes the baby regulated and resilient, based on oxytocin and dopamine. Regulation. Separation produces crying. And the crying is a desperate signal from the baby to say, help, I'm separated, I need help. And therefore, that is, baby knows my mother will pick me up. My mother doesn't, means she can't. Now I am unsafe. I immediately start making more more cortisol. Why? Because cortisol is a regulating mechanism. It's part of this am I safe circuitry. Also, no, cortisol will regulate me. But yes, at the price of vulnerability. And toxic stress is defined as the absence of the buffering protection of adult support. That's all it is. And this is fine for a 1-year-old, bad for a 1-year-old now. But it took a long time before we realized that it applied to the preterm and the newborn infant. So let me show you an illustration. White noise, you see, this is very popular in the United States and perhaps in Canada also. And this baby is now sleeping beautifully. It's been calmed down. No, not. This baby is in a state of high fear. And the rising crescendo sound makes the amygdala send a warning signal that makes a morrow. It's called vigilance. This vigilance is quickly replaced by an extension freeze. This is a state of parasympathetic and sympathetic hyperstimulation, and it's not sustainable. Bradycardia can come in it. And then the baby dissociates, and you think it's gone to sleep. What I'm describing are terms described by Perry and many other researchers into this situation. Because when a threat is far away, vigilance. Crying is my mother will pick me up before the threat finds me. If the threat is closer to me than my mother is, I stop crying and I freeze. Mother will make a noise and distract the threat from me. If it comes too close, I tune out, I dissociate, and I'm in a state of fear, terror. And I can go through these states in half a minute. So this is toxic stress. Self-regulation does work. Everybody likes to do self-regulation. Yes, it works. You can see it works. But how does it work? It works by toxic stress, by high cortisol levels. And it alters maternal connection of dopamine and oxytocin, so that when you see maternal neglect, you can measure it on an MRI scan, and you blame this mother for being a bad mother, but actually she was born badly. Her obstetrician and her hospital separated her from her baby. The baby didn't have a chance to make her brain connections. So toxic stress affects parents' brains also. And so the DNA is coded early, DNA memories of early social life, epigenetic protection of the maternal touch and DNA methylation, very, very early life. And here I've just taken some quick pictures. Immune triggering hormones, signaling hormones, metabolism, glucagon signaling is there, but also very early, the receptor for cortisol and the receptor for oxytocin is vulnerable in the first 1,000 seconds. The newborn intensive care unit is not just 1,000 seconds or 1,000 minutes, it can be 1,000 hours, which is 6 weeks. So this is Nurturescience, and this has taken me slightly longer than I wanted to describe the science. And everything is on this one question. This key thing is, am I safe? Am I regulated, or am I going to be in toxic stress? Emotion regulation and stress regulation depends on threat appraisal. Am I safe? This slide just has more technical words, but the key word is, am I safe? And there's many different terminologies we can use. The emotional connection is primarily driven by smell and its resilience that is creating health across the lifespan. So when I use the word zero separation and Nurturescience, these are just two sides of the same coin. It's exactly the same science, just two sides of a coin, if you like. So in some brief minutes, preterm births, premature babies, and the theme of our World Prematurity Day. This is Epistos. My partner, research partner here in Stockholm is Agnes Linnér. Immediate parent-infant skin-to-skin. Sweden's very egalitarian, you see, and fathers are going to do a lot of skin-to-skin here. In this case, even an aunt. So here you can see that Sweden has developed this method over some decades, not just some months. This is a 9-week baby. And so we're showing you the very small baby. It's getting identical care, only in a different place. And this place has to move from the ward where it was born to the neonatal unit. And so there's a bridge, NICU bridge. So we have all the technology in the obstetric environment and we move it along. And what did the study show? It showed that regulation, the baby that's separated, even in Stockholm and Stavanger, has a poorer cardiorespiratory transition to extrauterine life when separated. So that's Epistos. And the immediate kangaroo mother care study you heard mentioned in the introduction. And so here, the baby is going to get the exact same technique that's done in Stockholm and Stavanger. Here you see a picture of my wife doing the training in Norway, and with the same written SOP. We filmed it in Norway and Stockholm, and we took the SOP to India and 4 African countries. And here you see my wife doing the training in Tanzania. And here you see Ghana, Malawi, Nigeria, or the other African countries. And these are 1 kilogram to 1.8 kilogram babies. And they were not immediate, actually, because in third world, low income, middle income countries, we had to weigh the baby. We didn't know the gestations when they were born. And then we still have to fill in a whole lot of very rigorous randomized controlled trial documentation. And then we still had to open an envelope And then we still had to do the steps to get from the envelope to starting skin to skin. So about an hour. And the controls are getting the best possible care. I skipped this earlier when I talked about this, but what I need to say here now, the control groups got more skin to skin, more kangaroo mother care than any other study before. They started at 2 days initiation, and they had about, after becoming stable, then they had about an hour or two per day. That's quite a lot in many studies. And then when they were stable, they got 20 hours a day to 19. So they got very, very high dose skin to skin. They also got the minimum package of care. All the hospitals were given CPAP machines, the same CPAP machines. They were given the same monitors, mobile monitors, static monitors, scales. We trained them for 6 months before, and we visited every 3 months throughout the study to make sure that they gave the best possible care. All the babies got early colostrum in the first hour and frequent expression there afterwards, despite the best possible care that could be given. Doing skin to skin decreased the mortality from 16 to 12. 25% reduction in mortality. And the ethics committee said, we can't continue. Too many babies are dying because they're being separated. What was it that kept these babies alive? What was it that made the difference? And it turns out it was sepsis. So sepsis was 36% less that the babies died from, and 18% less actually treated for it. Almost to say that the babies who were separated, who got sepsis, were less resilient and more vulnerable. And the irony here is, for 40 years, we've had the assumption, the belief system, the paradigm that skin-to-skin contact is dangerous for small and sick babies because of sepsis. And the evidence is the exact opposite. The science is the exact opposite. The guidelines advise that skin-to-skin contact with the caregiver start immediately after birth without any initial period in an incubator. And here you see the WHO recommendations for preterm low birth weight infants, and they're all the preventive, complicated treatment things. And number one is kangaroo mother care is routine. And then you will read a new and strong recommendation: should start as soon as possible after birth, immediate kangaroo mother care. This is a change from earlier guidance and common clinical practice. This is a change in paradigm. It's asking for a paradigm shift, a fundamental assumption that babies should not be with their parents needs to be changed. That's what the World Prematurity Day theme says. Immediate skin-to-skin care for every baby, everywhere. And this is also an expression of ethics, if you like. The best interests of the child are paramount. This comes from the Convention for the Rights of the Child in the Children's Act. The child's best interests are of paramount importance, every matter concerning the child. And therefore it's autonomy, but it's also about doing good. Avoiding harm is the primary ethical driver of the medical profession. Risk reduction is how we measure that. And so the problem with risk reduction is that we can avoid harms, but that's not what a newborn baby needs. A newborn baby needs health enhanced. It needs these 1,000 seconds of colostrum, of microbiota, of regulation, of gene epigenetic setting of clocks, oscillators in the brain. That is an active requirement for health enhancement and not risk reduction. Risk reduction does not achieve resilience. It's an important thing that I'm saying. Yes, we must avoid risks, but not at the expense of making babies vulnerable so that they die in the long term. See, our medical model is pathogenetic. I will find your disease, cause, treat it, and you'll get better. Pathogenetic model. But if you leave something, it just reverts to normal. And you actively need to enhance health. It's called the salutogenic model. And this we did in the IKMC. Here you will see that there are KMC supporters who did these few things that I have mentioned. Here you see my wife doing the training, and she's sitting on the floor in a hospital in India. It's clean, I assure you. Yes, but she's respectful to the mothers, bringing them up. And they start skin to skin immediately. And they transport the mothers without separation. And even before the skin to skin starts, but during skin to skin, early colostrum expression, and therefore frequent colostrum expression. And it's continuous. Mothers and grandmothers and anybody else must sleep in the safe technique position. And therefore, there's a shirt that they're doing. I'm describing for you a lot of risky. Well, they've been called risky by others, but they're profoundly health enhancing, and they alone reduced mortality by 25%. Not by reducing risks, but enhancing health, doing good. And these KMC supporters, my wife and I work, we like to call them Kangaroo Mother Care Doula, a Kangaroola. This is the embodiment of the science, where there's advocacy for the best interests of the child. It's an obligation to do such advocacy. And therefore, this is what we want to do. I need to finish here. I'm a few minutes over time. It was a non-medical intervention, if you like. No medicines were involved. By enhancing health, we reduced the mortality that was already pressed down to 16 to 12. And therefore, this is, I'm repeating a little bit, but we'll finish here. Separation is necessary, I said. I was told. We've always separated. Our outcomes are improving. No, our survival is improving, but not our outcomes. And so, can we delete all of these? The best interests of the child are paramount. There's one thing that I do not want to delete. I'm saving. Technology saves lives. I told you that we gave CPAP machines to all these hospitals. Yes, we need CPAP machines. That does not mean that we have to separate the babies. That does mean we have to learn a whole new skill set on how to combine technology and skin-to-skin contact, which is what you see on the right-hand side of the picture, where a mother is sitting in skin-to-skin contact with the baby on full-on endotracheal tube ventilation. And therefore, the best interests of the child are paramount. The best interests of the child is its mother and its parents. And therefore, summary, zero separation, prematurity, nurture creates resilience. This emotional connection, even at 26 weeks, is necessary to thrive. Resilience makes better outcomes, and separation increases the risk of vulnerability. So the best interests of the child is zero separation and nurture science. This is also the theme of our World Prematurity Day. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Dr. Bergman. What an incredible presentation. It was just so much information and so interesting to think of how we had millions of years of doing things, and in 100 years we changed things so drastically. but maybe now with work like yours, we might find ourselves going back to zero separation.
I hope so.
I wonder if you could share some thoughts. We're going to take some questions as well, but just to get us started, what do you think we can be doing to help push this paradigm shift? Because I think anyone who listens to your presentation can start to understand the importance of it, but it takes a lot to shift a paradigm. So where should we be starting with that?
I'm trying this for some 35 years. I still didn't find the answer. Only that, yes, by identifying some of these obstacles in our minds, the main obstacle is in the mind. It's an assumption, a worldview. We have one of my favorite places, not favorite, but one of my most illustrative places is in California. I won't tell you exactly where, but the mothers give birth in one county and the babies are cared for in the next county. This is institutionalized in regional politics, in finance, economy, in academia, in professional separatism, in our parents are institutionalized in their way of thinking. So when I say the paradigm, the worldview, the way of viewing reality, it's extremely pervasive. We have to change it. And I would be very pessimistic if I tried to give you an answer now. But, we have shifted a lot in 10 years and even more in 20. I hope we're going to shift twice as, or 10 times more in the next 5 years. Sometimes we find in big movements, you get something called a tipping point. And suddenly everybody says, well, what's the problem? We're doing it. Already now, people are saying, oh, no, we know this and we're doing it. While they're not. So even that is a good sign because it clearly is getting through. So you, Jenna, are a mother of premature babies. And I have addressed this talk, the child's best interests is its parents. I do think parent organizations may be one of the most powerful tools to make such change. How long must I talk? I can use a good example. 40 years ago, premature babies had major surgery without anesthesia because doctors believed their brains were so immature they didn't feel anything. Bizarre, sickening. It changed because one mother wanted to have explained to her how it could be so. And the surgeon couldn't. One mother stood up to the surgeon. So yeah, but here we have a lot of mothers. Thank you, Jenna, for being where you are. Yes, we need to advocate for our own children, and we're doing humanity a service when we advocate for those of others.
Very good point. We do have another question, a little bit along the same lines, but a bit different in topic, talking about very extreme preterm babies, those who are born 22, 23 weeks, where you really have to work at that balance between survive and thrive. How do we incorporate zero separation when there's such fragile medical issues?
So different ways of trying to address this. One is that the skill set that is required is very, very advanced. And you can't, on that borderline, ever be didactic. There's a kind of level of science and art. Here in Sweden, we have a number of units where that art is driven to a high level, and then a new professor, and then he changes things. But you can also see that when it was at that high level, the developmental outcomes were better. And I would here specifically be referring to a hospital here called Uppsala University, where and Stenungsson and a number of Swedes have looked, researchers have looked at this, extreme low birth weight outcomes without long-term handicap. And so, yes, you can drive survival. And where do you drive that survival with handicap? And can you then find a tipping point where you will advise the parent that I can make your baby survive, but only with severe handicap? If one knew those boundaries, but we don't, because these are also actually rare babies. We talk a lot about them. We do. Oh, what about? So we mustn't let the 22-weeker stop us from doing the right thing to the 26-weeker. This tends to happen, you see. The 26-weeker is robust. 24-weeker, the 22-weeker in Sweden is only allowed to be worked on in the academic context, where it's part of a research unit that has the mega structure of every single specialty facility that will not only bring to bear its expertise, but reflect and question its outcomes. Have I answered it at all?
I think so, yes. Yeah, no, I think it's...
Then there are a number of very practical things about the texture of the skin. And here in Sweden, what they're pressing me now, they want me to say, well, zero separation. Yes, we got that. But until I can do zero separation, can I measure something in between? But the answer is yes, you can. I don't want to concede it too much. Björn Westrup conducted a study here in Stockholm where they were doing 8 hours a day of skin-to-skin contact. Then they got it, and they admitted parents into the unit 24/7. They did nothing else different. Purely the fact that the parents were in the unit. They didn't do more skin-to-skin, even though they lived in the unit. They did exactly the same amount of skin-to-skin. And the bronchopulmonary dysplasia in the old group was 11 compared to 3 in the new group. Wow. So the difference? Purely presence. How did the baby know that? Maybe from smell, maybe from sound. Sound alone will protect rat pups from depressive changes in the brain after separation. So my not compromise answer is, but for the 22-weeker, you want the parent to be present. And you want the parent to be sensorily, measurably, perceptively aware to be there to the infant. Yes, the mother can be at the end of a screen and a camera. No, that's useless. She needs to smell, she needs to sound, she needs to move. And so even if she's touching just with the tip of a finger and she's not stroking, but so the skill set of developmental care, fine is well popular, but NIDCAP is the perhaps greatest, deepest expression of this understanding. Part of this. I can make it very complicated. But step one is the parents, plural, must be present 24/7.
I think that's the perfect line to end the discussion on, because like you say, that's it. That's the takeaway. 24/7 present. Thank you so much for taking the time to share all this presentation with us. It's just absolutely fascinating, and I know people were captivated watching along, and I'm sure people are going to be watching over it again many times. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank everyone who was watching along with us today and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Again, all of our Preemie chats are available to review afterwards. You can share them with people that you think would also benefit from watching this as well. And I'd like to thank our sponsor for Preemie chats, which is AstraZeneca, for their ongoing support of our educational programs with the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation. And as we were talking about next week, of course, November 17th is World Prematurity Day. We will have a special Preemie chats happening for World Prematurity Day. All three of your Preemie hosts, myself and Leah and Fabiana, will be here with about half a dozen different guests for you next week. So it's going to be a really wonderful celebration. And if you're looking for more information about our activities, about what's happening, or about resources in general, please head to the website canadianpreemies.org. I will remind you that we are a parent-led charity organization. You can find a donate button on the website as well if you feel so inclined. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next week.